For one reason or another, the greatest period in the history of Southampton is either ignored or neglected. With the forthcoming 80th anniversary of D-Day, it is intended largely with the help of contemporary film to put the record straight, so that the courage and sacrifice of those who embarked from the port is not forgotten. Major General Sir Nigel Holmes, also known as Noel Holmes, said that without Southampton we could not have done D-Day. This was because the port was a springboard not only for the British and Commonwealth Armies, but also the headquarters for the US Army, and over 2 million GIs embarked at Southampton. This account is taken verbatim from the official history of the US Transportation Corps, which describes the role of Southampton during this period.
During the last half of 1943, the 14th Port supervised the discharge of approximately 350,000 measurement tons of cargo at London, Southampton and Plymouth. Of that amount, 162,224 measurement tons were received at Southampton. After being relieved at London, the 14th Port confined its work to Plymouth and Southampton, to which the latter was to become the main installation. Plymouth, a victim of the German Blitz, had only limited cargo capacity. Early in 1944, it became under the jurisdiction of the newly arrived 13th Port, which pushed through the faltering barge construction programme at Truro, Totnes and Hale, outloaded large amounts of ammunition at the old Cornish port of Fowey for the invasion of Normandy, and dispatched thousands of troops and vehicles from Plymouth and Falmouth for the cross-channel attack. Southampton became the principal US port on the south coast. In peacetime, a thriving passenger port and a familiar gateway for visitors to the British Isles, it had suffered severely from enemy bombing. As a result, the port had remained idle for some time, and much of its cargo handling equipment had been removed to other ports. Yet, despite the considerable damage, Southampton remained one of the best ports in England. Deep water and relatively little tide made it a port of few locks, and there were numerous modern piers, as well as 7 graving docks for ship repair. Although many British officials feared that the port was too vulnerable, the Americans reopened it in the summer of 1943, and the fears were soon found to be without foundation. Early US operations were handicapped by the shortage of cargo handling equipment and labour troubles. Labour at Southampton, as elsewhere in Britain, was in short supply and none too efficient. During the summer and fall of 1943, the activity of the 14th Port at Southampton was interrupted by a number of strikes, several of which represented protests against the presence of American military police who were stationed in the hatches to prevent pilferage. Nevertheless, by October, cargo operations had increased substantially. Early in 1944, the headquarters of the 14th Port was moved from London to Southampton. Fairly compact office space and a sufficient number of billets were obtained in and near the city by using various structures, including the Blymont Barracks, a wing of the Civic Centre, a school and 2 hotels. In the ensuing months, cargo handling facilities were greatly improved, and except for minor squabbles, labour disputes practically ceased. Southampton, together with the ports along the southern and eastern shores of Great Britain, including the Thames and Humber River areas, contributed substantially to the build-up in the British Isles by receiving cargo diverted from the heavily burdened Bristol Channel and Mersey River ports, particularly after July 1943. But Southampton's principal wartime contribution was to be made as a port of embarkation rather than as a port of discharge. In the months preceding the cross-channel assault, the emphasis in Transportation Corps operations increasingly shifted from receiving personnel and cargo to planning and preparing for the outbound movement to the continent. Since southern England was close to Normandy and the scene of the greatest concentration of American troops, the ports in the area were the logical installations from which to mount and support the invading forces. During May 1944, with Lieutenant Colonel Leo J. Mayer in command, all cargo discharge operations ceased at Southampton, and the port personnel concentrated their efforts in preparations for the Normandy invasion. From D-Day onwards, the Southampton port of embarkation played a key role in the outbound movement of US troops, equipment and supplies to the continent. A major port activity at this time was the loading of vehicles and drivers aboard specially converted Liberty ships for delivery across the Channel. Because of the proximity of the continent, its excellent facilities and the experienced Army port organisation, Southampton remained active to the end of the war. The port was also destined to play a prominent part in the redeployment and repatriation of American troops and in the movement of British war brides to the United States. The British ports obviously had a large responsibility in the build-up of American strength in the United Kingdom. By the end of June 1944, the US Army port organisations, with British cooperation and assistance, had landed in the United Kingdom a total of 1,792,512 US Army troops and 15,573,699 measurement tons of cargo. Beginning on D-Day, almost all the US military resources slowly built up since January 1942 had to be shipped out during a relatively short period in a sort of bolero in reverse. Although this activity was bound to reduce the importance of the UK ports, all were under great and continuous pressure during the critical spring and summer of 1944.